I thought the way that we might open up, both for Drs. Herzfeld and Delio, if the two of you would maybe comment, and Dr. Herzfeld, were you able to hear Dr. Delio's presentation?
Yes, I was.
Oh, wonderful, good. So one of the things that have come up is the question of bodies. We are really expanding or problematizing or blurring some of the distinctions, maybe they're a holdover from the modern era or whatever, about what a body is. So I wonder if each of you, maybe Dr. Herzfeld, if you want to go first, could you say and summarize what you mean when you say a body or even embodied? And could you maybe also say why it matters how you answer that? Do you hear those two questions?
I do hear those two questions. And they are not easy questions, especially not to answer very quickly. Embodied, there are two levels to this. I mean, the first is having an actual physical material presence. Now, you can argue that someone appearing across cyberspace has a material presence in the screen or whatever it is that happens to be there, just as you can argue that a robot has a material presence in its robotic form. However, I think there is a difference between that and being embodied in a human body. And I guess to underline that difference, I want to return to something that Ilia talked about quite a bit, which was transhumanism. The idea that maybe we could upload our brains to computers at some stage and live on. One might argue that's still embodied. You're still inside a physical apparatus of some sort. But the transhumanists themselves are not taking into account the complexity of the human body when it comes to human consciousness or human thought. You know, when they say if we just map the connectome of the human brain, how the neurons are connected there, we'll have it. They're not taking into account the role of the neurotransmitters. They're not taking into account what we have now learned about the role of our guts. They're not taking into account muscle memory. In other words, as a body, we're not just like a mind inside any old apparatus. Even things that we consider mental properties or processes happen within the larger body as a whole. So there's the question of just being embodied in something material, but also the question of what important things make up the human body. Now, while the post-humanists admit that we can let go of certain parts of our bodies, we can have robotic appendages, we can have certainly cybernetic enhancements to different parts of our body. My argument is that essentially, without the human body, you're not going to have a human mind. And another reason for that is simply because the body, as we know it, is the locus of how we learn. It's the locus of our experience as a human being. And Dave Chalmers has written a marvelous essay asking, what is it like to be a bat? And the fact is that as a bat, you have bat experience. We have human experience inside a body. Any other sort of body would give us a very different kind of experience.
Which is why my favorite comic book character is Batman. So, Dr. Delio, do you? My sense is you might have a different inflection point to that same question.
It's a really important question, interesting one. I guess my problem with the question is you can't ask about a body apart from mind, right? It's because we know, there's something about us we know that we have a body. And so I don't want to artificially separate the body from the mind, which is in a sense what the question does for us. And yet there is something about our embodied mindedness and minded embodiedness that has, as Noreen was saying, a physicality to it. And I was thinking, in terms of that idea from Merleau-Ponty that the body extends the flesh of the world and is part of that flesh of the world. And therefore, I think if I talk about embodiment, I think the senses are really essential. And therefore, the idea that these portals that, that enable me to experience the world, to experience others, are important to my embodied mindedness, right? So I think in terms of the essential nature of embodiment, which I take body. So why body is important is because we don't want to separate ourselves from biological nature nor from cosmic nature. And once we start talking in the language of this mind or mind without body, we're no longer in a cosmos. I don't know what we're in. We're in something of our artificial, and I think, if I could just put it this way, I think separating the mind and the body is the artificial of artificial intelligence. I don't think there's anything other artificial about what we're talking about here. So I think embodiment means how do we retain the extension of our personhood, our senses portal personhood that links us with the wider world of relationality in a way that digital life may expand that, life without compromising or hijacking it in some ways. So again, I find the question just a little bit strained because we're artificially separating the body from the mind to answer the question.
It's why I asked it.
I know, I figured that.
I mean, in all honesty, because it's interesting, the question of what does a body mean, you can read into that I'm making a separation with the mind, which I wasn't. But to talk about it, we do, which is really interesting. Dr. Kim and Kärkkäinen, as we think about this question of body, technology, the sort of future we're hurtling towards in this technological society, some of us, it terrorizes and terrifies us. Others, it's a sort of utopian vision, As we think about mission, I'm struck that Paul's primary metaphor is about the body. We celebrate as the central Christian practice the celebration of a body that's broken and distributed into other bodies that consume that body. It's extended, it's embedded in context. Is there something about what this conversation in terms of our bodies vis-a-vis technology informs us in terms of how we think about what it means for, specifically in this case, the Christian vision of mission and the role of our bodies and then the body plays in society?
I'm not sure that I can answer all of that question, but I think I would like to say that what we're talking about, especially with transhumanism at any rate, is a very elite view, and it's the classic intellectual view, isn't it? I mean, we all download our minds into our books and we live on. We already do that, and we just want to kind of magnify it. But so it's not the stuff of most people's ordinary lives, I don't think, and places where the kind of technology we're talking about is something that's going to have to be bought, and most people will not have the means for that. Most people will not have the opportunity to participate in that kind of enterprise anyway, just as not many people have the opportunity to write books. So we're talking about a very narrow strand of what humanness might be about. And to me, when Jesus makes the central Christian motif, the breaking of bread, he's bringing it right down to where people actually are, and to human practices, and to the body unites us. The body is how we are recognized as human. So yeah, anyway, that's as far as I can go, I think.
Apart from talking theology or spirituality, where body language is very common, I prefer to use the term embodiment, because for me, embodiment is a wider vision than merely physical or material. Of course, to embodiment belongs what we nowadays name physical and material, but embodiment also speaks of wholeness and, for example, the idea that mind, when we talk about embodied mind, as we talk about embodied love, it doesn't make sense to ask where does love end and where does embodiment begin. And in terms of mission, that is important in many ways. Let me highlight one aspect, because as you know, I do quite a lot of work in comparative theology, comparing notes with other religious traditions. It is at the core of Christian eschatological vision to talk about embodied resurrection, or resurrection of the body. And therein, while we still talk about the resurrection of the body, we have to mean something little bit different from what we currently understand with the body, and yet it has to be similar enough to make sense. And its implications, as I said briefly, are that if we talk about resurrected life, embodied resurrected life, there needs to be some kind of correspondence between the life conditions here and there. And that is very different vision from many great faith traditions. All the great Asiatic faiths, they intuit a flight from embodiment and even flight from this kind of world. And so that's one of the connecting points between mission and what they think about embodied mind, mindful body.
It also, I think, Dr. Kim, your point is really interesting. We got some that raised some similar questions of the ineliminable sort of power dynamics that go along with this conversation. Dr. Delio, you raised the interesting thing of like the visions for transhumanism are driven by what's hard to say or anything other than a kind of a patriarchal vision of life, a vestige of Enlightenment thought. But then even like in the academy, we have a sort of elitism that we have a privilege to talk about these things in ways. And I wonder, as we think through the sort of global realities that most people face on a day-to-day level, how does this conversation kind of exert a pressure on the realities of those who are not even right now thinking for a second about the coming post-human future? Is this purely a sort of Western European conversation, and should we name it as such, or is it in fact a global conversation and we need to do a better job of saying those who have the privilege of having it need to translate to those who aren't having that conversation? VMK, you want to go first?
Can I very briefly just give my personal testimony? Last week I was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the Lutheran World Federation's consultation. One of the things we talk about was in the future, in the digital world or in our world, to what extent does it make sense to celebrate Holy Communion digitally? It sounds at first like not a big problem, but it may or may not be.
It may or may not be, yes. Noreen or Ilia, would you like to go?
Yeah, well, as you were asking that question, first of all, I think I wouldn't want to say that technology is only a Western privilege. I mean, we do find more and more, cell phones are almost ubiquitous, even in Africa, in parts of Africa that lack clean water, so it's kind of, at least telling us something. Second is, I look at the way technology has, for example, coalesced the global climate change movement, especially among Generation Z. Would we have a consolidation of consciousness around global warming if we didn't have social media, and young people who are, in a sense, living in that world of social media, raising the concern? So I find that a deeply pastoral concern that technology is, in a sense, accelerating and bringing up the level of consciousness globally. So I find I wouldn't want to just kind of draw a line between say this is a privilege of the academy to talk about this stuff, and the rest of the world just, plodding along. I think what we can gain insight just be observing how culture is increasingly embodying, if I can use that word, technology in the concerns of global climate change, immigration, women's rights, et cetera. So I find actually a great resonance between the rise in consciousness, between social justice concerns and younger generations. And what I find really interesting is the way younger generations are actually consolidating. I mean, isn't it fantastic that a 16-year-old, from Sweden, I think from Sweden, can cause, attention, raise attention, and then kids in Japan, in North America, in Canada, in Africa can all skip school, in protest against global climate warming, global climate change. So there's something there that we need to pay attention to.
Can I add that when it comes to mission, I think we all know that one of the things that is really important is having, as deep an understanding of their culture as possible. And we see the effects of culture on the acceptance of AI very clearly if you compare the acceptance of robots in Japan, where they're coming from a Shinto tradition that is animistic and so believes that there is a soul in everything, including things that we would consider inanimate matter. That has made the acceptance of robots in the workplace go very smoothly. Robot co-workers will be welcomed with a Shinto welcoming ceremony, blessing ceremony. And that is quite different from the acceptance of robots in the West, where we have tended, I think, to be much more suspicious, or at least the jury is out on accepting these as a part of our day-to-day lives. And a lot of that is rooted in the religious culture, the religious background that we are coming from.
Yeah. If I can say that's good. Just one more thing here, two more things, maybe. I think technology is challenging how we've done mission in the past, and it's inviting us into new structures of ministry on a global basis, out of a new level of consciousness. Second thing is, I think technology is inadvertently causing a meeting of East and West. And I think a lot of what we're seeing here in the West is the West has always been very focused on the individual, the particular, and the East has been more focused on the transcendent and the relational, the interrelational. And there's something that's going on here, East meeting West in and through the noosphere, if I could put it that way, that I think is bringing the whole global human community to a new level. And so mission will change.
I think that's actually a good segue. We've got maybe time for one more question for maybe all of you to respond to. And I'll try to connect it from, there were a number of questions about that in particular of what the problems are of too quickly giving into or losing a sense of autonomy or individual, right? That do we want to maintain some boundedness to what it means to be a person? An individual autonomy, like now what adjective do you add to that? But the whole conference and then our theme really is about what does it mean to be human in some very real ways? What is a Homo sapien? And we've yesterday heard some great talks where we were talking about Homo Deus at one point and Techno-Sapien and ultra-human. And it makes me wonder, are we talking about and then we're even now talking today about evolution. Like, are we talking about an evolution of genus or species? Is technology or these visions of life calling us to move beyond what we currently are, or to become more fully what we were meant to be? So I wonder on those lines, theologically speaking, I take as my starting point, Jesus is the only true Homo sapien. And this could be flawed, so feel free to push back. And the call that Jesus, in whether it's the story of the Good Samaritan or elsewhere, that call to compassion is a call to be and become more fully a Homo sapien. such that maybe right now I was playing with forms saying maybe we're Homo imprudens or something like that, becoming Homo sapiens. So is the call of mission to go from Homo imprudens to Homo sapiens, or are what we're suggesting is the lure of technology, the promise of technology to go, what we're doing is evolving from Homo sapien to something else? I wonder if each of you could respond to that from any position, whether it's technology, mission, or theology. And Noreen, would you like to go first?
Sure. I do not believe that we're being called to be something else. I think computers are our tools. And as much as we are not being called to become hammers or anything else, we are not being called to become computers. This is not the next step in evolution. Evolution is a biological process. I think we need to be careful, however. And here I want to come back to what I said about the AI that we have right now being primarily funded by the different militaries around the globe. A long time ago, the physicist Enrico Fermi asked a famous question. They were talking about life on other planets, and he noted that we have not been contacted by any life on a different planet, and he said, "Where is everybody?" And I think we are possibly facing something that if there is life on other planets, they have also faced, and that is a technological bottleneck. In other words, biological evolution moves slowly. And we have evolved to have greater consciousness, to be a Homo sapiens, greater thought. I hope that through our religions, we are also evolving to be more moral, more responsible. But this is a slow process. I think anyone who does mission knows that, we're not necessarily becoming more moral very quickly. On the other hand, our technology is moving at an extremely rapid pace, and we are developing more and more ways to basically do ourselves in at a planetary scale. And this may very well explain why we haven't heard from anybody else, that there's this bottleneck we have to get through where we have to evolve morally and spiritually as fast as our technology evolves. And right now, I wish I could say I saw that happening. I think Ilia is maybe a bit more hopeful than I am that is happening. I worry that we are entering that bottleneck. And it's frankly going to take all of us and all of our missionary work, and whether that is missions to other countries or frankly missions to Silicon Valley or to Washington, D.C., to make people aware of the tremendous power that our technology has for good and for evil, and that we harness it for good and not for evil. A colleague of mine said recently, what we really need is a moral Turing test. And, if we're going to have an artificial intelligence and say it's like us, it has to be like us, not just in intelligence, but in morality as well.
This is a great question. And, let me just say a few things. One, we have not always been Homo sapiens. And I think we need to be a little sobering, in what we are, because we act as if we've always been here. And the fact is we're not. We're the most recent arrival on the scene, right about 140,000 years old. So I think we need to put this within the context and the flow of biological evolution and say, we have not always been Homo sapien, and therefore we will likely not always be Homo sapien. Now that may alarm us, but it shouldn't, because God, God loves to create and God loves to do new things. So I think we need to be open to that possibility. However, I do think two things. I think we are changing, quite honestly. I would not just say, and I think we would not do ourselves well to try to remain what we are. In other words, to work against the evolutionary push that technology is luring us into. I think what we do need to do is take hold of what's happening to us, and we do need to keep assessing what are we as persons. And certainly from a Christian position, this is really important. Teilhard used the term ultra-human. saying that we're not becoming something other than human. We can become something more, a deepening of what we are, right? A deepening of our relationality, of our spirituality, of transcendent nature. So that's one thing. I think get used to the fact, and we have to think in evolutionary terms. And I think this is where I find sometimes the difference. We're thinking, sometimes we have this brain that thinks in kind of static Aristotelian terms, and then we kind of talk about evolution, and kind of a mix of things is going on here. And we need to think in terms of process and change about ourselves. Second is, I would agree with Noreen that we do need a moral awakening, but this is exactly where I think the problem lies with religions being alienated from modern science. And this is what Teilhard's big thing was, right? Had the Catholic Church said to Galileo, hey, great, Gal, that you really confirmed heliocentrism. That's really wonderful. And, maybe said, gee, maybe things are not so, fixed in place. Maybe life is about change, complexity, and biological evolution. And then all our doctrines would need a revisiting as well, right, in terms of evolution, including original sin, including salvation, including eschatology. We haven't done this work. And I think because of that, because we have sort of marginalized religion from science and its progress, we are now facing, I think, deep moral problems because there's nothing that animates, the moral decision-making in a way that's consonant with the world in which we're living. So, my thing is, maybe what I would say is we need to be take a humble stance here in AI. Know that we are beings in transition. We are beings, in the Heideggerian terms, we're becomings. We're happenings. We're works in progress. As people say, I'm still a work in progress. So don't get too hard here. But also we need this is my concern, is we need a revitalization of religion as the deepest core connection with ultimate meaning and concern, to use Tillich's terms here, or what we might call God. I think we don't have a pole of connection, and therefore we don't know how to act towards anything that's more than our individual selves.
Thank you. Kirsteen, you want to contribute to that?
Well, I think I'd just like to go back to your earlier point that we've been shown what it is to be fully human. And from a Christian point of view, we need to live into that, whatever the surrounding circumstances in our new digitized age. And the problem is not that we don't understand what it is to be human, but we don't act on what it is to be human. So that's where I'd want to put the emphasis.
Wonderful.
Very briefly, I also advise us to advance slowly and be humble. What strikes me about the work of our Creator is that he seems not to be in a hurry.
God works in some frustratingly slow ways. I agree. Well, thank you. We could just keep going on and on and on. Again, we have contributions from each of these folks that will be in print. Thank you all for joining us, Dr. Herzfeld, Dr. Delio, Dr. Kim, Dr. Kärkkäinen. Can you give me, or join me and give me a round of applause to this fine group?